All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us here at the Shadows on this Juneteenth. Today's program is the Faith and Freedom Symposium, and it's part of our program series on faith and freedom that explores topics around faith and faith organizations and freedom movements. Abolition, Black Lives Matter, civil rights movement, all of those things. We are very excited today to have a really cool lineup of speakers for you. We will not, just a few housekeeping things. We're not going to be taking breaks between speakers. So if you have to use the restroom or refill your coffee or any of that, feel free to excuse yourself and go and do that because we're not going to really take very long breaks between them. Just about enough time to set up the next PowerPoint and then we'll move on, okay? We should go till about 12:30 today. Dr. Cody Roberts, who is our keynote, will be signing books after, okay? At the end of every presentation, I've asked speakers to leave about 15 minutes for questions because I know how much our audience loves to ask questions. And for those of you joining us online, we are live streaming this. So if you're joining us online, use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen, okay? Today's first panel is from Loyola in New Orleans. Loyola is one of, 5 Catholic universities in the state, and one of the largest Catholic universities in the state. And they're going to be discussing desegregation and discoveries around desegregation. So.
Thank you everyone for coming. Today we'll be presenting on Jim Crow South in the Catholic Church, uncovering the history of desegregation at Loyola University, New Orleans. My name is Mare Lodu. I'm the Digital Collections Archivist at our Special Collections and Archives.
My name is Lessley. I'm the Archives Project Assistant.
And I'm Janine Smith. I'm the University Archivist and Special Collections Registrar.
So just over our agenda today, for this presentation, we'll begin with some background information on the exhibit that we curated in collaboration with the Historic New Orleans Collection, also known as HNOC. We'll then discuss our research and curation process and showcase some of the highlights from the exhibit itself. And then following that, we'll discuss some of the challenges that we encountered and successes we achieved along the way. We'll then end with some new discoveries we made after completing the exhibit, as well as curators' picks and selections from the cutting room floor.
So in the fall of 2025, our university president, Dr. Xavier Cole, became aware of an exhibit that was curated by the Historic New Orleans Collection, which had a traveling component known as the Trail They Blazed. And it focused on social and racial justice during the civil rights movement in New Orleans and was built in collaboration with local leaders who participated in and were present during the civil rights movement. Dr. Cole felt it was important to bring this collection to campus to share with our students, faculty, and staff, and to make them aware of this history. It was at this time that the team in Special Collections felt that it was important to be a part of this conversation and to curate an exhibit that would correspond with the Trail They Blazed. And we wanted to emphasize Loyola's history of desegregation and its own struggle with social justice and civil rights. So with exhibits, before any exhibit can take shape, the research behind it is really important. And we knew that we had several manuscript collections that we could pull material from, including the papers of 2 important Jesuit priests, Reverends Louis Toomey and Father Joseph Victor. And we also had the collection. It's the Rosemary Drown Archdiocese of New Orleans and School Integration Collection, long title. And this collection focuses on the documents of the Archdiocese intent to end segregation in parochial schools and the fierce response by local opposition groups. And the image that you see on the screen is from the Rosemary Drown collection. And then the two papers of the Jesuits, the Toomey papers are essentially a very robust collection. They are related to civil rights and labor rights. I'll discuss Toomey's work a little bit later on, but to better understand the material in Toomey's collection, I was able to lean heavily on a biography that's entitled At Face Value, and a dissertation by John Robert Payne. And that was to better understand Toomey's activities and convictions regarding civil rights and labor rights.
So there are two publications worth noting that we conducted research with. The first is Founded on Faith, A History of Loyola University, New Orleans. Founded on Faith is a comprehensive book that was published in 2012 to commemorate the centennial of Loyola University. It was authored by Dr. Bernard Cook, who is a historian and has taught at Loyola for over 40 years. This text was especially useful for corroborating our timeline of desegregation. We cross-referenced this with other texts to determine the exact year that the entire university as a whole was officially desegregated, as well as other key dates. And a second publication we relied on was Black, White, and Catholic, New Orleans Interracialism by Reverend Bentley Anderson. Reverend Anderson is the chair of Catholic Studies at Loyola, and Black, White, and Catholic traces the history of efforts to desegregate the Archdiocese of New Orleans, as well as Loyola University, New Orleans, including the work of Jesuits Father Toomey and Father Victor, who Janine just mentioned. Father Anderson also did a lot of archival research at our archive for this project, which was published in 2005. And this book was particularly useful for contextualizing Catholic interracial organizing led by students at Xavier and Loyola University, which we'll get into more later.
So to further our research and get a larger scope of the materials we needed for the creation of this exhibit, we also looked into records such as the Maroon newspapers, the Wolf yearbooks, and our president's files. Each of these offered a distinct look into student and faculty presence on campus and how desegregation and civil rights efforts started to show up within the university. Primarily, we relied on these resources for identifying photos of students and the formulation of the first Black Student Union on campus, as well as information of photos of summer programs like Project Seesaw, which gave a closer look into clerical and equipment maintenance skills programming that was offered throughout Louisiana, affiliated with the Institute of Human Relations. Thank you. So the exhibit we curated is titled Leading Towards Justice, Loyola, New Orleans, and the Struggle for Civil Rights. In total, we had 4 display cases, just as the one that you see above. And each of these display cases focused on varying topics of the civil rights presence at Loyola and how faith leaders played a role in the desegregation work at Loyola and throughout the greater New Orleans area. The main focal points of the display cases are Loyola, desegregation of Loyola University, Father Toomey, Father Victor, and African American stories. We are going to break those down for you and give you a glimpse into everything that we put together. The display case that I primarily focused on was the desegregation of Loyola University. The purpose here was to identify a timeline of major events encompassing what was happening on campus with the students. The timeline dated between 1921 to 1970, starting with the earliest efforts of integration with the Sisters of the Holy Family, which was a Catholic order of African American nuns who received teaching certificates administered through Loyola as a summer course program, to 1970 when Edward Chase III, prominently known as Dookie Chase, became the first African American president of the Loyola Student Council. In the timeline, you see prominent moments in history, such as when the first Black Student Union at Loyola was formed in 1968, formally named Expression, and the first efforts of integration of the athletic field house in 1954. And during our research process, we were able to gain insight from other faculty on campus who are also doing work within this realm, specifically Dawson McCall, a professor in history who has previously worked on oral history projects with some of the founding members of Expression, documenting their experience at Loyola during the civil rights movement and ongoing desegregation on campus in the greater New Orleans area. What was really interesting to put together was the first few African American students being accepted into the Loyola School of Law. There was really a clear timeline in our collection that highlighted how much racism and pushback was present in bringing Black Catholic students to campus, but also the advocacy from faculty, especially from Father Toomey and Father Victor. Dr. Norman C. Francis and Benjamin J. Johnson were the first Black students to be accepted into the law program, both graduates from Xavier University, who both continued on to becoming prominent figures in New Orleans in education, law, and civil rights. And in choosing photos to share with you all, which is really difficult when we wanted to just show you everything in our exhibit, I wanted to bring a letter from Father Toomey that was sent to Richard Gumbel, a Black Catholic student who was initially denied acceptance to Loyola. Father Toomey had reached out about the changes in policy on campus, hoping to bring this bright and successful student to Loyola. And while Richard Gumbel decided to move forward with Georgetown University, in our collection, we have Richard's response back to Toomey, which reflected so much personal grief and emotion and thoughtfulness into the decisions that were made and why he couldn't move back to New Orleans after uprooting his life when he was rejected from Loyola. Throughout the curation of this display case, the research truly highlighted not only advocacy for Black Catholic students to be admitted into the university, but also the pushback that came from administration. President Thomas J. Shields was a consistent figure who pushed back against progressive changes within the campus community and desegregation efforts, and was very vocal about what organization and publication efforts could be allowed on campus. This letter above is from the president advising Father Fichter that the publication of the Christian Conscience could not be produced on campus, and while also making the process for bringing Black priests on campus much more complicated than it needed to be. Overall, the goal with this timeline was to expand our understanding of major events where desegregation was prominent at Loyola, the faculty and students recognized, and how it wasn't necessarily a smooth and easy journey during the civil rights movement and beyond.
In our second display case, we focus on the work of Reverend Louis Toomey. Lou Toomey was born in 1905, and he was ordained in 1939 and arrived at Loyola in 1947, specifically to open a labor school, which at the time it was known as the Institute for Industrial Relations and later became known as the Institute of Human Relations. Toomey, through his work, found that labor rights were directly entwined with civil rights. He made it his life's mission to lead social reform efforts to combat segregation and racial injustices by taking aim at the inaction and indifference of fellow Jesuits. With the founding of the Institute of Human Relations, Toomey created a research-driven center that offered non-credit courses for adults on labor management relations. In 1950, Reverend Toomey was granted permission to enroll 20 African-American students at the Institute who would be under the auspices of Loyola while not actually enrolled at the university. By the 1960s, or the mid-1960s rather, the Institute began offering vocational training programs and clerical work and equipment maintenance and operation out in the community in places like Kenner, Slidell, and Reserve. Another noteworthy component to come out of the Institute was the publication of Christ's Blueprint for the South. It was later renamed the Blueprint for Social Justice after Toomey's death. And by the 10th anniversary of the publication, over 2,000 copies had been circulating across the United States and to countries around the world. And it began as a regional sorry, I lost my place there. It began as a regional communication for Jesuits in the South. It grew into a national and international resource on Catholic teaching and influential tool for education and advocacy well into the 21st century. And then lastly, on your right, Reverend Toomey gained the attention of the very Reverend Pedro Arrupe, who was the Superior General of the Society of Jesus. Reverend Arrupe tasked Toomey with developing a statement addressing the racial crisis in the United States, which would be disseminated to the society and secular audiences across the world. The letter is entitled A Letter on the Interracial Apostolate, and it was drafted by Toomey and then fellow Jesuit and friend William Keneally. So it's a very strongly worded letter, and it demanded a deeper commitment to social equality and civil rights, and it urged the society to realign with, quote, manpower and resources to meet the crying needs of our brothers in Christ who languish in racial degradation and inhuman poverty, end quote. In the years following the publication, the Jesuit order adopted a stronger anti-racist position, which led to the establishment of practical programs promoting racial equality among Jesuit high schools and universities across the country.
So the third display case in our exhibit highlights the work of Reverend Joseph H. Victor. Reverend Victor was a Jesuit priest, scholar, and social reformer from Union City, New Jersey. He entered the Jesuit order in Grand Coteau, Louisiana in 1930 and was later ordained a priest in 1942. Reverend Victor also received a doctorate in sociology from Harvard University in 1947, and that was the same year that he arrived at Loyola, where he taught in the sociology department for over 40 years. He has published numerous books and articles on controversial topics within the Catholic Church, such as alcoholism and marriage within the priesthood. Reverend Victor was also very passionate about racial equality and worked closely with the Black community. He was a founding member and chaplain of the Commission on Human Rights, as well as a co-founder of the Southeastern Regional Interracial Commission, also known as SERENCO. The Commission on Human Rights, or CHR, was an organization established in the Archdiocese of New Orleans in 1949. It consisted of adult Black and white Catholics, and the goal of CHR was to end racial segregation within the Catholic Church. Some examples of the exclusion that Black parishioners faced within the church included being forced to sit in designated pews in the back or receiving the Eucharist separately. They were also excluded from receiving care at Catholic hospitals. Members of CHR advocated for reforms within the Catholic Church and against racial discrimination and exclusion. They also attended Mass together at Xavier University and published a monthly newsletter titled Christian Impact, which is pictured to the left there. We showcase this specific volume because it includes an announcement that Norman C. Francis and Benjamin Johnson were admitted to the St. Thomas More Law Club at Loyola after being admitted to the School of Law. And then to the right, we have a copy of the Christian Conscience, which was another newsletter, but one that was published by SERENCO. SERENCO was a subcommittee of the National Federation of College or Catholic College Students, and it consisted of Black and white Catholic students from Loyola, Xavier, Sacred Heart, Ursuline Academy, St. Mary's, and Spring Hill in Mobile, Alabama. Students in SERENCO advocated for integration of Catholic institutions. In addition to publishing this newsletter, they coordinated an event called Interracial Sunday. This specific issue of the Christian Conscience acknowledges the ordination of Joseph A. Francis, the brother of Norman C. Francis. And as I mentioned, Interracial Sunday was an event organized by members of SERENCO. The first event that they held was in March 1949 at Ursuline Academy. It included Mass, a shared meal, and guest speakers who addressed the issue of racial discrimination within the Catholic Church. The inaugural event concluded with closing remarks and a benediction by Archbishop Joseph Rummel. The commission also sponsored a speech contest and a poster contest to encourage participation among high school and college students. To the left, we have a poster design that was submitted to the fourth Interracial Sunday in 1952. And on the right, we have this striking photograph of Larry Brown from Xavier and Joan Forche, who served as the secretary for SERENCO, receiving a blessing from Rev. Leander Martin. Rev. Leander Martin was ordained in 1941 and was a member of the Divine Word Society, Southern Province. And the eighth and final Interracial Sunday was held in 1956. So the fourth and final display case in our exhibit is titled African American Stories. We didn't want the exhibit to center entirely on the work of two white allies, so it was really important for us to gather materials that centered African American voices, stories, and experiences in the fight for civil rights within the context of Loyola and New Orleans at large. So there are four different aspects to this particular display. First, we highlight African American civil rights activists in New Orleans who participated in the 1963 Freedom March. Pictured at the center of this photo is Lawless Ellie, who was among one of the first African American students to graduate from Loyola School of Law. As an attorney, Lawless Ellie handled significant legal cases across New Orleans and represented organizations such as Louisiana Consumers League, CORE, NAACP, and the Black Panthers. A major part of this display also identifies archival gaps within our special collections, which Janine will talk about more in a bit. And then we also delve into Reverend Victor's sociological work with the Black community and the history of the Sisters of the Holy Family at Loyola. So the New Orleans Freedom March took place on September 30th, 1963. It was the culmination of a series of sit-ins and boycotts in New Orleans, led by civil rights activists. In response to these events, New Orleans Mayor Victor Shiro signed an agreement on August 9th, 1963, to desegregate public buildings and hire qualified African Americans for city positions. When Mayor Shiro failed to uphold said agreement, tens of thousands of demonstrators descended on City Hall to present a petition to the City Council. The Freedom March included many prominent civil rights activists, including Aretha Castle Haley, Don Hubbard, Dr. Leonard Burns, Revius Ortiz Jr., and many more. Aretha Castle Haley, in particular, led the New Orleans chapter of CORE, and her home served as the headquarters for the Freedom Riders during the 1964 Freedom Summer. In 1960, she was arrested along fellow student protesters for a sit-in demonstration at McRory's Five and Dime store on Canal Street. Her conviction was later overturned in the U.S. Supreme Court in Lombard versus Louisiana.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about the archival gaps that we discovered. What made this particular exhibit challenging was discovering the lack of records pertaining to African American students, faculty, and staff, specifically during this time period. And in this profession, this is what we refer to as an archival gap, which is the intentional or unintentional, though more times than not, it's the intentional exclusion of records based on what previous archivists have deemed as not important enough to preserve. So these decisions by these previous archivists have greatly impacted and influenced the historical record. A prime example of this is the photo on the screen. This photo is in the Toomey papers. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of context for this photo. The back of the photo denotes that it was taken in the 60s and that the youth standing left was arrested and allegedly beaten by New Orleans police. The subsequent photos in this collection document his injuries. It also lists Ray Ariotti as the photographer, who was the longtime friend of Reverend Toomey and was also the staff photographer of the for the Institute of Human Relations. So the last piece of information that we have says that the father was a worker at Loyola, and it is really frustrating to not be able to contextualize who they are and better tell their story. So the remaining vignettes in our display have their own archival gaps. The image on the left is of an interview between a Loyola student and Joseph Wilson, a Black community member. Reverend Fichter believed in using social justice to improve relationships and break down racial barriers. And as early as the late 40s, Reverend Fichter required students in his sociology courses to engage with Black community members in New Orleans on the issues of status, housing, employment, and civil rights. Later courses required students to interact with students at Xavier and Dillard universities on their attitudes about desegregation. While these arguments would have been seen as progressive at the time, the interview transcripts and resulting research findings were filtered through the perspective of white students. And lastly, the exhibit features the Sisters of the Holy Family. In the early 20th century, when Louisiana began revisiting teacher certification requirements, the sisters sought accreditation for their teaching diplomas. Reverend Fichter was aware that the sisters had been affiliated with Loyola in the 1920s and wanted to make that history known. Through his research, Fichter discovered that the sisters were receiving credit through Loyola, though no records of their enrollment can be located in our archive. However, Fichter was able to confirm this history in the archives of the Sisters of Charity in Greensburg, Pennsylvania. The Sisters of the Holy Family participated in a teacher training program held at their convent in New Orleans, and it was known as Loyola II. The program was taught by the Sisters of Charity, with Loyola University serving as the credit issuing institute from 1921 to 1937. Fichter's findings strongly indicate that the Sisters of the Holy Family were likely the first African American students to receive academic credit through Loyola, even though our holdings don't document their presence. In the display, we show a document that chronicles the history of the Loyola Summer Program, which is located in the university president files. It was written in the 1940s by the university registrar, but there is no mention of the sisters in this history. In the article Fichter wrote about his research process, he states that Loyola II closed in 1938 when incoming university president Godin refused to support the program. The president and university registrar would eventually deny that the sisters had taken courses in the summer program. While it's horrendous to think that this part of history for both Loyola and the Sisters of the Holy Family was essentially covered up, it's an honor and a privilege to share that history and bring that truth to light and share it with you today.
As you can imagine, creating an exhibit from start to finish is very, very time consuming. We were working with a really small time frame with only 3 months to research and curate and promote and successfully complete this entire exhibit. So this included going through extensive amounts of boxes of the material that we have, identifying what would be useful to put in the display cases, creating descriptions, and ensuring that the display cases flowed in a way that would be represented pretty well to the public. And typically, exhibits of this breadth would have been done within a 6-month to a year timeline. And so I'm really proud of our team for making it happen within 3 months, but it surely was a very difficult challenge to work through.
So the time constraints that we faced also heavily impacted the creation and design of the exhibit. We had to create high quality scans of all the images in the exhibit to be printed and mounted on foam core by our printers. This involved ensuring that every single file was properly labeled with a collection identifier as well as the box and folder numbers so we could keep track of provenance. Every scan as well as the captions and headers had to be sized. We didn't have a designer to assist us, but with my background in art, I was able to use my skills with Adobe Creative Cloud products to design and size down all of our files. I also coordinated with our printers in December and January in between holiday break, which was challenging, as you can imagine. And we also had a couple of hiccups once our order was actually printed and did. At least 2 items had to be reprinted and resized, but considering the amount of work that we did, that wasn't too bad. But we also had the incorrect dimensions for our window clings, and just kind of had to work with what we had because the exhibit was opening the following week. But with those constraints and hiccups, we still made it work to the best of our ability.
And then lastly, archival gaps, as I had mentioned a few minutes ago, we recognize that the disparity of the early records relating to African-American students and other students of color in our archive. The 3 of us come from diverse backgrounds ourselves, and we are, it's on the forefront of our mind, and we understand the importance of inclusion of these records and these stories. So in order to accurately preserve the history of Loyola, we hope to build relationships across campus and acquire materials from all members and groups across our campus community. And, it feels like at a time when it's an affront to celebrate diversity, we think now is more important than ever to uplift these voices and stories.
After completing the exhibit, a successful moment was being able to see it all come together at our opening reception. We had a wonderful turnout of community members, HNOC curators and installers, JSRI members, Loyola faculty, and students. The Dean of the Library, Trish Nugent, and Civil Rights Leader Dr. Ronnie Moore both gave speeches on the importance of the work that we were doing and how much it still resonates with where we are at in the world today. Dr. Moore is a long-standing legendary civil rights activist born and raised in New Orleans, threading his whole life in community organizing and advocacy for social justice and voting rights. He has spent his life fighting for racial justice and received an honorary doctorate from Loyola, and it was an honor to have him speak with us at the opening reception, and currently he is a JSRI Father to Me Legacy Scholar. And with this, Dr. Moore can reflect and write about his life's work and dedication to racial justice and Catholic social teachings to then create a blueprint for social justice. And overall, it was so moving to be able to see everyone interacting with both the HNOC exhibit and the Special Collections and Archives exhibit. And by the end of the reception, we even had one guest surprisingly find a photo of her grandfather in the display, which was a really serendipitous moment for a community connection.
We've also had instructors from 3 different departments engage with the exhibit. That includes English, Languages and Culture, and History. Dr. Allison, or Sarah Allison, in the English department brought her students to view both our exhibit and the HNOC traveling exhibit. And as part of the assignment, students were tasked with writing a poem inspired by what they learned from either exhibit. And some of those students even wrote their poems on postcards that we designed for the show, which you can actually grab a copy of back there later. So that was one creative and exciting opportunity to come out of this project.
And another success to come out of this venture was a deeper collaboration with JSRI, which is the Social Justice Research Institute, whose foundations are tied to Toomey's Institute on Human Relations and later the Toomey Center for Social Justice. JSRI has been a big proponent in the development and promotion from the very start, and they were even the party responsible for funding our opening receptions. That was really great. And then JSRI worked with students to work with our Loyola students to script a tour to give to other local high school students and Loyola courses alike. But perhaps my favorite part of this occurred as well. Let me back up real quick. Was a partnership that they invited us to join Loyola students and Dr. Ronnie Moore for a civil rights tour. So this tour started at the Amistad Research Center, and then we ended up taking a bus to Donaldsonville to the River Road African American Museum. And a part of that tour, we stopped at the Church of the Ascension, which has a really, really beautiful Georgetown University 272 memorial. And so you can see some of the pictures from inside the church and the stunning stained glass windows. And then the last stop was at the jail. So Dr. Moore was arrested several times actually throughout his life, beginning as early as 19. He was very big in voter registration. And in the summer of 1963, just days before the March on Washington, a group of over 200 people were arrested in Iberville Parish they refused to stop singing "We Shall Overcome." And so Dr. Moore and some other members from CORE were taken to Donaldsonville and were held in the jail there for 11 days. And so, I have to say it was very, very moving. Dr. Moore's in his 80s now, and to see him sitting in that jail cell where he was held was just really emotional and moving. And, he just spoke with so much compassion and forgiveness, and it was just really humbling. And it's, one of the most iconic moments that I'll stay with me for a long time.
So we also wanted to touch on some of the new discoveries we made after the exhibit was completed. As the digital collections archivist, I have been working on a metadata remediation project with our university photographs, which were digitized back in 2012. So this project includes adding authorized subject headings and descriptive titles so that the collection is a lot more discoverable and accessible. And as part of this process, I encountered this photograph on the left from the School of Law that includes both Norman Francis and Benjamin Johnson, along with their law school classmates. Another photograph that I encountered was to the left of the Sisters of the Holy Family from 1920. If you can remember a couple slides back, we had a photo from 1902, and that was actually from the Library of Congress. It's a public domain image, so we were able to use it freely, but we included it in the exhibit because we weren't aware that we had a photograph of our own. So it was really excited to come across these images. And since Norman C. Francis's passing, the law school is currently working on an exhibit honoring his life and legacy. So I'm glad that we're able to share this photograph with them because it's one of the few that includes both Norman Francis and Benjamin Johnson.
So some of my favorite aspects of this exhibit was really going through the newspapers. I personally loved it so much. And when we think about archival gaps and the lack of representation of Black student life on campus, newspapers were a small way to get a glimpse here and there about what was going on. And I think that the Maroon had kind of served as a great way to acknowledge student engagement at Loyola through the lens of the students. And more specifically, I loved coming across this photo of Dookie Chase, especially when we think about how prominent he and his family are to the New Orleans community and the livelihoods there. And there was something really touching about engaging with these materials. So that was something I took away from this exhibit.
And we thought it'd be fun to include some images from the cutting room floor. I really love this image. Love how the sparks kind of bring the photo to life. This comes from the Toomey papers, and it is an image of men enrolled in the equipment maintenance program through the Institute of Human Relations. It's a great photo, but we felt like some of the other photos that we showed you previously better captivated like what the programs were through the Institute.
And then one of my favorite findings that didn't make the cut was from the Rosemary Drown collection. We didn't include this because we had so much material to work with, but it's a publication called Black Catholics Concerned. And it was published by the NOBC, or the National Office for Black Catholics. NOBC was founded in 1970 and headquartered in Washington, D.C. Its mission was to make the church relevant to the needs of the Black community and to assist in the Black liberation movement. Black Catholics Concerned was actually the name of NOBC's annual fundraising effort. And they used this funding to sort of host workshops and conferences to connect Black clergy across the US. The organization continued on until 1987, before it was essentially disbanded and subsumed by the National Black Catholic Congress. And I love these images in particular because I'm drawn to this image of the Black Jesus as well as the Black clergy members donning their afros. And of course, this quote from Pope Paul VI, which goes, enrich the Catholic Church with your valuable and unique gift of Blackness, which she, the church, needs, especially at this moment in her history. And that concludes our presentation.
And I think we're open to questions if you have them.
I just wanted to thank you. I accidentally walked in on this presentation, but I knew several other people that you talked about. I knew Ronnie when he was just Ronnie.
Yeah.
And had no idea now I'll have to call him Dr. Moore. And I knew him when he worked with Father Albert McKnight. And a number of projects that he worked on. I want to thank you for that. I also wanted to say that Joseph Abel Francis, the bishop, I played as the musician for his funeral. Had an opportunity to look at his will, stating what he wanted that experience to be like. And so that's moving. His father was my barber. And I just wanted to thank you. And I could tell that Ronnie's fingerprints were all over what you were doing. So again, thank you very much, and I enjoyed the presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really lovely. Thank you for sharing that.
Came in a little late. Is the exhibit still up right now? How long is it gonna be up?
I think we anticipate that it'll be up for the rest of the year, for sure. We may or may not be curating another exhibit in the spring for another collection, but yeah, it's available to view.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
One question, the picture of the family with the young man who was allegedly beaten by the police, that's so touching. It's painful, of course, for anyone.
Right.
Looking at it. But what's just as painful is the fact that we don't know anything about him or about the family. That you did. Were you even able to find his name?
There's no information, no names. Just all that we know is that the son was beaten by police, and I tried to cross-reference some newspaper articles to see if I could find anything. But because the photograph was in the Toomey papers, we kind of assumed that perhaps maybe this staff member worked for the Institute in some capacity, because the Institute was like one of the first departments to like actually enroll Black students. So I would imagine perhaps that maybe he worked with them in some capacity, and that's why Toomey and Ray Ariotti were aware of his existence and what had happened to his family. But there's no way to confirm that. He really could just have worked anywhere on campus. But and that's another piece of like the archival gap, is like not just the Black students on campus, but like Black staff and faculty. We don't really have a whole lot of information there yet, and that's like something that I think we can like work on building up. But yeah, it's
Is the assumption that the father worked for Loyola?
Yes, the father is the staff member.
And so there's no picture of him, no way to talk records?
Not for this time period. I think I did try to look at our bulletins that are no, not our bulletins, but our faculty and staff handbooks. We have a couple of those, but not from this time period.
Right. Well, and also, so like the directories that we do have for faculty and staff were for like Loyola University specifically. We don't have a whole lot of like administrative documents from the institute itself, and I think that's where we would find that answer.
Have y'all gone outside and looked at like criminal record, like arrest records and stuff, for those time dates for these issues? But if he was beaten, he was probably arrested.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, no, we didn't get that far, but that could be another project that maybe we could collaborate with a student on.
Yeah, definitely. And as Em mentioned, we were under a very, very short time frame. These kind of exhibits usually do take about a year to curate and like really thoroughly research everything. So yeah, that's something that we definitely would like to look into further, because I think it's a really important story that's a part of our history.
Okay, any other questions?
All right.
No? Great. We have 10 minutes before our speaker, so I guess we can have a little short break if that's okay. First, I want to apologize that the live captioning is not working this time. I can try to work on that on the 10-minute break here. So, all right, so let's take a short little break and thank our speakers.
Yeah, thank you.